Welcome back to True Echo, where the most unbelievable real-life stories echo with truth, second chances, and the power of the human spirit. Today's story begins with a barefoot boy in the rain, a mother bound to a wheelchair for over a decade, and a single sentence that stopped a millionaire in his tracks. The rain didn't fall hard that afternoon, it hovered in the air like the sky had forgotten what it wanted. In a grocery store parking lot glistening with puddles, a barefoot boy stood beside the cart return, unmoving. He wasn't begging, wasn't talking, just watching. His name was Tyrese Mallory. He was 11 years old, small for his age, with skin smudged by the streets and hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks. But his back was straight, his stare steady. He waited, and he knew what for. At 3:17 p.m., a black Lincoln Navigator glided into the front row, tires hissing against wet asphalt. Out stepped Charles Radner, millionaire, venture capitalist, and son of Helen Radner, the woman in the wheelchair everyone had already given up on. His suit was pressed, his shoes shined like glass, and the kind of watch wrapped around his wrist was less about time and more about status. Charles moved with a rhythm sharpened by control. Efficiency was his religion. The groceries were handed off by the bag boy, the car beeped unlocked, and Charles turned to slide into the driver's seat, when a soft voice cut through the rain. "Sir. I can make your mother walk again." Charles froze mid-step. His spine straightened, jaw clenched. Slowly, he turned. Tyrese stood 10 feet away, hands at his sides, eyes unblinking. "Your mother," he repeated. "I can help her walk again." For a heartbeat, Charles said nothing. His mind didn't even process anger first, only confusion. Who was this boy? And how dare he say that? "That's not funny," Charles snapped. "Who put you up to this?" "No one," Tyrese said simply. "I just need 5 minutes. You'll know I'm not lying." There was something deeply unsettling in the boy's calm. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't selling hope. He was offering truth. Charles, suspicious and furious, should have walked away. But instead, he asked, "What's your name?" "Tyrese." "Get in the car." The boy climbed in, careful not to dirty the seats. Charles didn't say another word as he drove, glancing in the rearview mirror more times than he wanted to admit. Something about this barefoot stranger didn't fit, didn't make sense, and that made him dangerous. The Radner estate stood like a fortress behind manicured hedges and wrought iron gates. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Charles finally broke the silence. "You have exactly 5 minutes. And if you try anything, I'll throw you out myself." Tyrese only nodded. "You'll want to hear what I say." Charles led him in through the side entrance, past Dolores the housekeeper, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing at Charles's stern glance. "She's in the sunroom," he muttered. Tyrese walked with quiet certainty, like he already knew the path. Helen Radner sat in her high-backed chair, blanket over her lap, silver hair neatly brushed. When she turned and saw her son, her face lit up. But her expression shifted as her eyes fell on the barefoot boy beside him. "Who's this?" she asked. "His name's Tyrese. He says he wants to see you," Charles replied, arms crossed. Tyrese stepped forward. "Hi, Miss Helen." Her smile faltered. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he said, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and laid it on the table. Helen reached out with a trembling hand. It was a sketch, pen and ink, delicate and vivid, of an old oak tree in a backyard she hadn't seen in 40 years. "You made this in 1982, Tyrese said. "Back when you lived on Ojiki Road." Helen's hand trembled. "I haven't seen this in, how do you have this?" "It was in your attic. I thought maybe it'd remind you what your hands used to know." Charles stepped forward. "Enough. Tell me how you know this. Who sent you?" "No one," Tyrese said. "But I had a dream about her 3 nights ago. She was sitting alone. Couldn't move. But she kept whispering your name. Helen's lips parted in disbelief. What else did you see? You, Tyrese replied softly. Standing outside her room. Angry. Blaming yourself. Charles's fists clenched. Stop. She waited up for you that night. Her last birthday before the stroke. You never came. I said stop. Charles's voice thundered. Helen's eyes filled with tears. I remember that night. Tyrese knelt beside her. You held on. You made it through. But your heart never forgave the rest of you. Helen touched his cheek. Who are you? Tyrese only smiled. That doesn't matter yet. What matters is, do you believe you can heal? Outside the room, Charles stood against the hallway wall, breath ragged, heart caught in a storm he hadn't expected. Inside, Helen's left hand twitched, just slightly, just enough, and nobody pretended not to see it. The next morning, Charles didn't go to work. He sat in his study, the blinds drawn, the room dim. In front of him sat an untouched tumbler of bourbon. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loud, insistent. Last night, he'd seen something he couldn't explain. His mother's hand moved. It had twitched. It hadn't done that in 11 years. Tyrese had said nothing medical, nothing mystical. Just memories. But that twitch, that tiny gesture, it had cut deeper than any diagnosis. All the doctors, the scans, the rehab bills, the no further progress expected talks. And then this barefoot kid shows up and stirs something nobody else could. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Franklin, he said when the other end picked up, I need you to look into someone. Name's Tyrese Mallory. Kid, maybe 11 or 12. Black, barefoot, might not be in school. No address. No guardians I can find. I want everything. Franklin sighed. A missing kid? A runaway? I don't know, Charles said. But something's off. And I need to know what it is. Later that morning, Charles found Tyrese sitting on the back steps of the house, whispering to one of the outdoor cats like it was a priest in a confessional. You slept out here? Charles asked. Tyrese nodded. Didn't want to leave yet. Charles sat beside him. You're not scared being out here alone? Tyrese shrugged. Been alone most of my life. It's just quieter in places like this. Charles studied the boy. You always talk like someone older. I say what I hear, Tyrese replied. Sometimes it just sounds old. Silence fell between them. Then, Charles asked something he hadn't planned to. Did you dream about me, too? Tyrese turned to him, face somber. Yeah. I saw you in a room full of light. But none of it touched you. You were cold. Like the light was shining for everyone else but you. Charles didn't respond. He wasn't sure he could. You know what pain looks like in others, Tyrese continued. But you won't look at your own. The truth in those words wasn't comfortable. It never was. Inside, Helen had sat upright in her bed, for the first time in years, without help. Her pulse was stronger. Her speech was clearer. Something was shifting in her. Dolores noticed. The nurse noticed. Everyone noticed. Charles stood in the doorway, watching. What did you do to her? He asked Tyrese that afternoon. Nothing, Tyrese said. She remembered something. That's not a medical answer. She's not just a medical case. Charles frowned. You're saying remembering made her hand move? I'm saying remembering made her feel again, Tyrese said. The body follows what the heart believes is possible. Charles scoffed. You sound like a motivational speaker. I sound like someone who listens. Helen chuckled softly. He's doing something, Charles. I feel like I'm waking up. And for the first time, Charles didn't argue. He just listened. Tyrese asked Helen to try something new. "I want you to picture your kitchen," he said gently, standing near the foot of her bed. From before the stroke. The yellow dish towel on the oven handle. The tiles under your feet. Helen closed her eyes. "Feel the sunlight on the floor," Tyrese said. "Feel your feet on that floor. Remember what it felt like to move, just a step." Charles shifted nervously nearby. Dolores shot him a look, "Don't interrupt." Helen's brow furrowed. A slight tremor passed down her leg. "Try moving your right foot," Tyrese whispered. A twitch. A shift. Her knee moved. Tears flooded her eyes. "I felt that." "I know," Tyrese said. "That memory wasn't dead. Just buried." Charles stared, the foundation of everything he thought he understood cracking again. This isn't possible." "Because it didn't come in a white coat," Tyrese said. Helen took a deep breath. "He's not healing me with medicine. He's helping me find the parts of me that never stopped working." Dolores whispered under her breath, "Have mercy." Charles followed Tyrese into the hallway. "What are you really here for?" he demanded. "Forget the dreams." "Why my mother?" Tyrese looked at him calmly. "Because someone had to believe in her before she could believe in herself. That's all healing ever really is." Charles didn't respond. But something inside him shifted. That evening, the estate felt lighter. Less sterile. Less still. Helen asked for music to be played, jazz, the kind she used to love. She sat upright while she listened. The nurse didn't hover. Dolores laughed when Helen rolled her eyes at the news anchors on TV. But Charles wasn't at peace. He was pacing the patio, phone pressed to his ear. No school records. No foster placements. No birth certificate, he said. Franklin sighed. Closest match is a kid who disappeared from Jacksonville 6 years ago. But he'd be 17 now. This Tyrese is 11. Or looks it. Charles didn't sleep that night. Again. Inside, Helen leafed through the sketchpad Tyrese left behind. A new sketch stopped her heart. It was her. Standing. Smiling. Holding a peach cobbler. A detail she hadn't told anyone, not even Tyrese. Not even Charles. And it left her wondering, what else had she forgotten? Helen didn't sleep much that night. The image of herself holding that cobbler, standing tall in the sunlight, drawn by a boy who shouldn't have known anything about it, haunted her in the most beautiful way. She hadn't thought of that day in decades. But now she could smell it. Feel the warmth of the oven. Hear her own laugh. By morning, something had changed. She pressed the call button beside her bed. Moments later, Dolores stepped in, still tying her apron. "I want to try standing today," Helen said. Dolores blinked. "You what?" "I need to try," Helen repeated. "Just a few seconds. Help me to the window. I need to feel the light." Word traveled quickly through the house. By the time Helen was in position, nurse on one side, Dolores on the other, Charles had arrived, looking wary. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You're pushing too hard." "I have to," Helen said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I need to know." The nurse counted. 1, 2, 3. Helen's feet touched the floor. Her body wobbled. Her hands trembled in the air. Then, just for a few heartbeats, she stood. Not straight. Not stable. But upright. Her own weight. Her own legs. She collapsed into the chair seconds later, breathless, and laughing. Laughing like someone who remembered they were alive. Dolores gasped and clapped a hand over her mouth. The nurse stared, stunned. Charles didn't know what to do. He had seen it. There was no denying it now. Helen turned to her son. You saw that? He nodded, stunned. Yeah. I did. Then don't you ever tell me that boy was a fluke. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Later that day, Charles drove through Savannah like a man sleepwalking through his past. He ended up in the forgotten neighborhoods, the parts of the city he hadn't visited since college. At a cracked bus stop bench near Skidaway Road, he saw him. Tyrese. Sitting cross-legged, barefoot, eating a crinkly bag of plain potato chips like it was a fine meal. Charles pulled up, rolled down the window. You're still here? Tyrese looked up. Didn't know where else to go. Charles got out and sat beside him. For a moment, neither said a word. She stood, Charles said eventually. Tyrese didn't smile. He just nodded. 3 seconds. It's a beginning. More silence. I had a dream last night, Charles said. She was baking that cobbler. I tried to steal a peach slice. She slapped my hand and laughed. I hadn't thought of that day in years. She remembered it too, Tyrese said. That's why I drew it. Charles turned slowly. Why us? Out of everyone in this city, why my mother? Tyrese tilted his head like the answer should have been obvious. Because you forgot how to care. And your mother forgot how to feel seen. That's a dangerous mix. Charles swallowed hard. You talk like someone who's been through it. I've seen a lot, Tyrese replied. People think broken means gone. But broken just means something happened. If you find the right pieces, you can still build something new. Charles studied him. No shoes. No bag. No answers. And yet, there was nothing missing in him. What happens now? He asked. You take her outside tomorrow, Tyrese said. Let her feel the wind on her face. Let her remember the world isn't just walls and windows. Charles nodded slowly. And you? Tyrese shrugged. Where I'm needed. But Charles wasn't ready to let him walk away, not yet. Because for the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. The next morning, Charles did something he hadn't done in a decade. He wheeled his mother outside, no nurse, no assistant, just him and her. The garden was still overgrown, the bench under the camellia tree covered in leaves. But it was hers. It had always been hers. Helen tilted her face toward the sun. I forgot how good this feels, she said. You used to come out here every day, Charles murmured. Even in winter. This is where I prayed, she said. He hesitated. Did you ever really think God would help you walk again? She didn't answer right away. I stopped asking for that a long time ago. I started asking for peace instead. Charles looked down. And now? Now I think, maybe they weren't the same thing. They sat quietly for a while. He reminds me of someone, she said suddenly. Tyrese? She nodded. Your father. Charles frowned. What? He doesn't look like Dad. Not in appearance. In presence. The way he listens. The way he sees people. Charles shook his head. You never really talked about him after he left. He didn't leave, she said softly. He disappeared. What? One day, he just didn't come home. No call. No body. Just, gone. Charles froze. I thought he died in a car accident. That's what I told people, Helen whispered. It was easier than the truth. She reached into her cardigan and pulled out a folded black and white photo. A man stood outside a diner, holding a small boy. Charles's hands trembled as he took it. That's Dad, and the boy. He squinted. No. It couldn't be. The boy looked just like Tyrese. That boy would be 50 by now, Charles said. Helen shrugged. Time doesn't always work the way we think it does. Charles felt like his heartbeat had gone silent. Are you saying he's family? I don't know what he is, Helen said. But I know what he's done. And maybe that's enough. Charles stood up, heart pounding. He rushed through the house, checking every room, every hallway. No Tyrese. No footprints. No goodbye. Just, gone. He called Franklin again. Forget the background check, he said. Too late, Franklin replied. There's nothing. No school. No birth records. No social. Closest thing I found was a kid in Jacksonville who vanished 6 years ago, but that kid would be 17 now. Charles hung up. Helen sat under the camellia tree, eyes closed, breathing deeply. The breeze smelled faintly of peach cobbler. And Charles realized, Tyrese hadn't just appeared. He'd always been part of the story. Waiting for them to catch up. A week passed. The Radnor estate didn't look different on the outside, no renovations, no construction. But inside, everything had changed. The windows stayed open now. Light moved through the halls instead of silence. Music, jazz records Helen used to adore, played softly in the afternoons. She even made jokes again, tiny stinging ones, the kind Charles used to secretly love. And most remarkably, Helen was walking. Not gracefully, not far. But every morning, with Dolores or the nurse on one side, she took slow, trembling steps across the living room. 3 steps. Then 5. Then 6. Each one a revolution. Charles had stopped trying to explain it. He no longer called doctors for opinions. He no longer needed answers from science to believe in what he saw. Because what he saw was life. Tyrese hadn't returned. He hadn't called. He hadn't left a note. But he lingered, everywhere. In the sketchpad Helen still clutched like scripture. In the sunlight that warmed her face. In the way Charles no longer barked orders but asked questions. Something else had changed, too. Charles no longer spent 5 days a week at his downtown office. He'd quietly launched a new initiative, the Tyrese Fund, a program offering physical therapy and mental health support to kids from underserved neighborhoods. No press releases. No press conferences. Just quiet help for those who had been unseen, unheard, until now. The pilot program launched out of a worn-down community center on Habersham Street. Charles visited often. He didn't know what he was expecting, maybe to see Tyrese again, watching from the shadows. But he never did. Not in person. Not in photos. Not even in dreams. Tyrese had vanished the way he'd arrived, like a gust of wind carrying something sacred, never staying long enough to be claimed. Then one afternoon, as Charles returned home, he noticed something tucked between the bars of the front gate. A folded piece of sketch paper. He opened it. It was a drawing of a Savannah Street corner, shaded in perfect light and shadow. And in the lower corner, barely visible, stood a small barefoot figure. Hands in his pockets. Eyes steady. No signature. No words. Just that. Charles stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the inside pocket of his jacket, near his heart. That night, he sat with his mother on the back patio. The stars blinked quietly above. The camellia tree swayed gently beside them. Helen had taken 7 steps that day. She looked brighter. Sharper. More alive than she'd been in over a decade. I used to be afraid to die, she said softly, watching the sky. But not anymore. Charles turned to her. Why not? Because I finally feel like I've lived again. He nodded. Do you think he'll come back? She smiled gently. I think he was never meant to stay. Charles didn't respond, but something in his chest ached. Because he wanted to believe she was wrong. The breeze shifted. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes clinked against one another like whispered truths. And Charles felt something loosen in him, something he'd held for too long. He pulled the folded sketch from his pocket and handed it to her. Helen studied it. "That's him," she whispered. The way he stood, like the ground never moved under him. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sky turn gold. "You're softer now," Helen said. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Softer?" She chuckled. "That's a compliment. You were too sharp before. Everything in your life had an edge." Charles looked away. Hard to run a company with soft hands. Harder to love anything that way, she replied gently. He didn't answer. Because she was right. They watched the sun set behind the trees, a warm orange glow lighting the edges of the garden. Charles thought of Tyrese, his quiet defiance, his ancient words, the way he listened with his whole body. He didn't understand who Tyrese was. Not really. Maybe no one ever would. But he understood this: sometimes the world doesn't give you what you ask for. It gives you what you didn't know you needed. Sometimes healing doesn't come from a hospital bed or a pill. Sometimes it comes from a barefoot boy in the rain. And when it does, the only thing you can do is listen. At True Echo, we believe the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest, they're the ones that whisper truth in the quietest moments. If this story moved you, take a second to reflect: who have you stopped believing in? What part of yourself have you forgotten? And if you found healing here, share it with someone else who needs it. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories that stir the soul. Comment below with the moment that touched you most. And never forget: sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest echoes.